Beijing has abandoned the Kremlin. Putin is in a panic. Russia is left without allies or influence. Trump has shown his strength. The US is not afraid of China. With tariffs and the military, they dictate the rules. China keeps up the pressure. Refineries are refusing Russian oil. The Kremlin is in a state of shock. A juicy piece of Russia is passing to China, and Putin is just watching. There is no resistance. We'll tell you all the details in a minute. The betrayal of the century. China has abandoned Moscow and Putin is left alone. The reality is harsh. China is negotiating with the US without Moscow's involvement. The geopolitical axis is falling apart like a rotten imperial set piece. Beijing chose profit over friendship. It acts independently, earns from bonds at the American rate, and receives a political bonus, the legitimacy of being an equal partner to the US. Putin has lost everything: allies, influence, and even the illusion of power. Moscow has turned into a raw materials appendage and a toxic burden. However, are the US really more loyal to China right now? And what is Trump actually planning by getting closer to the Middle Kingdom? I get along very well with President Xi, but the only way to have a good relationship with China is to act from a position of strength. The US president reminded everyone about the introduction of large-scale tariffs against China during his first term and stated that it was precisely these steps that gave Washington enormous leverage in its relations with Beijing. During my first term, I imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions. I imposed tariffs on China very early on. Then COVID hit us, we fought, we handled it well, but it was COVID. It came from a certain place in China. Yes, remember? Another wonderful gift from China. Trump emphasized that the US has enormous power thanks to tariffs and the military. They have a lot of missiles, but so do we. And they don't want to mess with us. I can tell you that for sure. Who would have thought the US and China, former trade rivals, now seem to be playing on the same team against Moscow? Sensational. Immediately after the meeting, the US lowers tariffs for China from 20% to 10%, and Trump rated his conversation with the Chinese leader a 12 out of 10. A new global alliance is taking shape, and there is no longer a place for the Kremlin in it. This is not just a diplomatic slap in the face, it's geopolitical payback. The US and China have put Russia in its place and rewritten the world order without it. All the details coming up, don't miss it.
Donald Trump met with Xi Jinping in South Korea as part of his Indo-Pacific tour. The main topics of the meeting were trade barriers between the countries and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war.
They agreed to develop a more forward-looking and comprehensive joint agenda for political dialogue, which in principle is considered to be a very positive and encouraging outcome of this important meeting.
As a result of the meeting, the parties agreed to reduce the tariff on Chinese goods related to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid analgesic, from 20% to 10%. The overall level of US tariffs will reach up to 47%.
The fundamental issues underlying the conflict between the US and China have not gone anywhere. And these are very important questions, such as the fate of the island of Taiwan and the possibility of imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, specifically because of the purchase of Russian oil. Trump diplomatically stated that these issues were not raised. But in such cases, as a rule, when you don't reach an agreement, you say that you didn't talk about it.
The agreements regarding Ukraine turned out to be less productive, despite the fact that, according to the US president, Ukraine was discussed at length. Initially, Trump wanted to persuade Xi to reduce support for Russia so that Putin would agree to end the war. Whether the parties reached any agreement in this regard was not announced.
A strategic dialogue of cooperation has been established between authoritarian Russia and authoritarian Beijing. And in order to risk that, Xi would have to receive something more substantial and genuinely significant in return, something that would match the high level of relations between America and Beijing. Given that for now, relations for sure are more strongly reminiscent, particularly of a logic of de-escalatory actions in the trade and economic sphere. I wouldn't say that a strategic alliance or ongoing dialogue has been established between Washington and Beijing.
Donald Trump rated the meeting a 12 out of 10. By the way, this was the first meeting between the leaders of the US and China in the past 6 years.
Based on the statement, we see that there will be no tariffs on Chinese goods and that American agricultural products will have access, so the statement seems positive. But how true that really is? Again, if we look at Trump's presidency, we remember at least Trump's claim that peace had been achieved in the Middle East, after 3,000 years. You know, I'm someone who reads the news. I follow the news from the Middle East, and what's happening there doesn't even come close to resembling peace in that region. So Trump's statement that everything has been agreed with China and everything is wonderful, let's at least wait 48 hours and then see what happens.
Trump said that he had agreed with Xi Jinping on a visit to China in the spring of next year. This will be followed by a return visit of the Chinese leader to the United States. And indeed, China quickly lost interest in Russian oil. After new U.S. sanctions against energy giants Lukoil and Rosneft, Chinese refineries began to massively refuse Russian supplies. However, this is not the only reason. Xi has also set his sights on Russian territories. More details in the following report.
State giants such as Sinopec and PetroChina Kosher are staying on the sidelines, having cancelled part of their Russian supplies after U.S. sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil last month. Smaller private refineries, known as teapots, are also holding back, fearing similar penalties.
Russia is starting to panic, a real blow to the wallet. The main buyer has started turning off the taps, and here are the first results. Supplies have dropped by almost 400,000 barrels per day. That's about 45% of all Russian oil exports to China. And not so long ago, it was Russia that was the main oil supplier for its ally. But now everything is going to hell. The oil friendship is falling apart. China is looking for profit, not pitying the Kremlin. And it seems that the era of cheap Russian oil is coming to an end. And yet another powerful slap in the face for Putin. Once a loyal friend, now they're starting to take the region away from Russia. China is turning Siberia into its own resource base. This is reported by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service.
One of the key examples is the Zashulan coal deposit in the Transbaikal region. Its development is being handled by a joint venture between Russia's N+ Group, owned by Oleg Deripaska, and China's Shanhua Group. The cooperation is planned to last 100 years, and the Russian authorities have granted the company tax benefits. Starting in 2027, they plan to transport 5 million tons of coal to China every year. That's about 500 trucks a day.
Moreover, a highway is being built for this purpose, but the jobs are going not to locals, but to Chinese specialists. The machine has been set in motion. Up to 2 million Chinese citizens already live in the Far East. It seems this is only the beginning of a silent occupation.
Even Baikal, the symbol of Russia's natural wealth, is gradually becoming part of China's economic interests. This underscores just how much Moscow has lost control over its own resource-rich regions.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
By the way, another major oil refinery, Yangchang Petroleum, refused to purchase Russian oil in its latest tender for crude oil supplies from December to mid-February. Previously, it regularly bought Russian oil, usually one batch per month. I would add that a number of recent Western sanctions on Russian oil supplies have led Chinese state oil companies and some Indian refineries to avoid such purchases. Tensions are reaching a critical point. Russia has finally fallen out of favor with China. Now Washington is closer to Beijing than Moscow is. Everything changed for good after the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi. Beijing and Washington are re-establishing contact, while Russia remains on the sidelines without allies and without influence. Xi made it clear that China is ready to talk to the US and prioritize stability over conflict.
China and the US can take on joint responsibility as major powers and work together to achieve greater and concrete results for the benefit of our two countries and the entire world.
Donald Trump and Xi have finally tightened the noose around Putin's neck. We
agree that the sides, are stuck and fighting, and sometimes perhaps you have to let them struggle it out. But he will help us and we will work together on Ukraine.
Moreover, Xi has started to act according to his own plan regarding Russia as well. Behind closed doors, the Chinese leader is deciding the future course of Putin's empire. The man in the bunker is watching this and can no longer hide his panic. But he can't do anything about it. Right now, a juicy piece of Russia is passing into China's hands. What will happen next, and will the Kremlin chief dare to resist? We'll talk about this in just a minute.
Russia is losing the Far East, unofficially but in reality.
Without any exaggeration, the Far East has become the most important factor in strengthening Russia's position in the world. Our flagship in the new global economic reality.
While the Kremlin is busy with the war, the region is quietly being divided by its neighbors, China and North Korea.
I would call it a kind of creeping takeover, creeping migration. For now, of course, control over the Far East still remains in Moscow's hands, but there are more and more Chinese there, and they are playing an increasingly significant role in the economy. But as they say, today they play a big role in the economy, and tomorrow they'll play a big role in politics.
More than 1 trillion rubles in investments from China. It sounds like help, but it's all centered around trade, not the development of the region.
China wants to use Russian resources on the cheap. And accordingly, they will have that opportunity. And that's why I think that the economic dependence of these regions on China will only continue to grow.
Also, the Chinese have long ceased to be guests in Russia.
The Far East simply isn't needed. It should just be given to the Chinese. That's what they want to do, after all. The Chinese could easily just come in and no one here would resist anymore. There would be no one to resist and nothing to resist with. According
to various estimates, up to 2 million people live between Vladivostok and the Urals.
This is called settling these territories with Chinese people, and in various forms at that. This includes both the migrants themselves as well as those directly involved in mixed marriages from which children are born. And accordingly, these regions are becoming more and more closely tied to China.
Now about North Korea. In the Far East, just in the past year, more than 15,000 North Koreans have officially arrived and unofficially up to 50,000. And that's not even the limit. A total of 153,000 new labor contracts have already been ordered.
There is a shortage of labor in Russia today because so many people were killed in the war. And accordingly, demographic problems still remain. So yes, there aren't enough of our own people. And in this sense, North Korea is an excellent supplier of labor resources because the people are disciplined and accordingly know how to march in formation in every sense of the word.
So it turns out that Moscow has handed over the region for temporary use. But why?
Putin needs people whom, as he sees it, are easy. Easy to control. It doesn't matter, even if not by himself, but through others. That's why he's confident that these people won't start a revolution, won't protest against Moscow's actions. He thinks these are very convenient people, and it would be good if Russia were populated by just such convenient people. After all, who knows what could happen with our own people?
But everything comes at a price. And the longer the Kremlin turns a blind eye, the more important the question becomes. Thank you. Who really controls the Far East?
In reality today, of course, Russia is a vassal of China, which China primarily utilizes to put pressure on Europe. And we understand that the global confrontation is, of course, not between Russia and NATO, but between China and the United States, China and Europe. In this particular case, it can be said that today's Russia is very much like a chained dog, one that obediently follows and complies with all the commands and instructions given by its master.
So, what happens next? Can the Far East still return to real control by Moscow, or is the opposite more likely? The influence of China and North Korea will only continue to grow.
The influence of China and North Korea will only increase. And accordingly, China will decide for itself whether it needs to legally take all of this under its own control. Or is it enough to have, let's say, complete economic control today, and tomorrow that will turn into full political control?
It seems that while Putin is focused on seizing other people's territories, he is gradually losing his own. And ironically, these territories are being taken not even by enemies, but by the Kremlin's allies. What do you think about the alliance between the US and China? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay informed about the main events and give this video a like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.